Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Tip Tuesday. I'm here with Ace Realtor Devin Gray from the Mogul team. And what we're going to be talking about today is something that's kind of fun, and that's how you can actually do a real estate deal without a realtor. Now, a lot of people out there are like, these darn realtors make so much money for just a whole lot of hoopla and chit chat. And what do they actually do in the transaction? And when you see the dollar value associated with having those professional fees added to your transaction costs, there's definitely people out there that say, you know what, I'd rather just try to do it myself and save it. And in some markets, you see things like for sale by owners. In Edmonton, there's a lot of like deeply discounted brokerages, or basically brokerages that are do-it-yourself style brokerages. So Devin just went through an experience where he had a transaction where the party on the other side, the party on the other side of the transaction, didn't have a realtor, and it was kind of funny because this guy was in a situation where he tried to do it himself, but very clearly didn't know what all of the steps were, and just kept kind of driving this transaction into a brick wall. So we're going to talk today about all of the things that you are going to need to know how to do, and a lot of the pitfalls that you are going to need to have, the legal and organizational expertise to execute if you have any hope of doing a real estate transaction all by yourself. So Devin, why don't you give us an intro to the deal that sparked the conversation?
Yeah, thanks, James. So this listing was with one of those mirror posting companies, which
Mm-hmm.
certainly is a choice of people that want to sell their property. They can go anything from just simply putting a lawn sign out on their front yard, or putting it on Facebook Marketplace, or getting into some sort of a more organized mirror posting, which is simply paying a bit of money, anywhere from $500 to $1,000 to get the property posted on the listing service. But pretty much after that, it is completely up to the seller to attempt to sell privately. So my experience, and obviously I brought my buyers, my clients, as we had an agreement in place. This was a property that they were interested in. And so it basically was making sure that I was protecting my buyer clients, which is obviously the role of myself on the buying side.
Absolutely.
But then trying to make sure, not trying to be successfully, because we're about to have key release, of making sure that the deal moves forward properly and in the timely fashion that needs to happen. And making sure that the seller is doing all that they need to do in order to make sure that gets done, which normally would be taken, that would be handled by the listing agent. But in this case, it was up to the seller, who really didn't necessarily know what to do. So that's ultimately where I came in to make sure the deal got facilitated.
Yeah, of course. And you know what? As we all know, you facilitated it like a pro. Um, but I mean, just being in the office chit chatting with you, I got to hear all the horror stories of what this person didn't know, and the complications that caused the deal, and how he almost, created all kinds of unforeseen circumstances for himself. So, Devin, let's kind of talk about it first from just the setting up the deal, prepping the contract, prepping the documents. Like, what are the types of things that we do as realtors that the average person is going to need to know how to do properly if they have any hope of doing a deal on their own?
Yeah, well, in thinking back in some of the conversations, and it's interesting, of course, when you're talking about big dollars, it's a natural reaction, that fight or flight, mistrust situation. So there was a lot of mistrust from the seller at the beginning, because obviously they didn't know me.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just took a reminder of him that I am a licensed professional, that all the paperwork and documentation that I'm bringing to the table is standard right across Alberta, to which ultimately you hope that any type of discount service is going to provide that information ahead of time. That's obviously not always the case. and to obviously make sure that there's an understanding that as a licensed professional, it's vital for all of us in the real estate industry to make sure that these things go along smoothly and legally and ethically in order to make sure that the deal gets transacted. Because if it doesn't, obviously that comes and looks very poorly on a lot of people and organizations.
So I mean, we're not naming any names here. We're not quoting any addresses here. So give me the good stuff. Like what are what are some of the things that this individual did when they were dealing with you and prepping the paperwork that just made you smack your head thinking like, oh my gosh, you're flirting with disaster here?
Well, it was, there's real estate is there's contracts, obviously are legal documents. However, it seems that there's varying levels of importance that people can put things on when it comes to writing up a contract. You can have contracts between family members and friends and all sorts of things like that. But when it comes to real estate, legal documents are absolutely vital to making sure that things move forward. As I tell a lot of my buyers and sellers, there needs to be, when everything moves over to the conveyancers and to the lawyers to make sure that all of this stuff happens legally, there needs to be a very clear, concise, chronological story that goes along in regards to, oh, this is what happened. This is when the offer happened. This is when this amendment, there was a change, then something was added, and on and stuff like that. And so it ultimately was really important in regards to one of the things that was a real challenge, was just making sure that from the other side, it was really understood that, look, if we don't get these things signed during the timeline that needs to happen, this deal is going to collapse. And so there were several times during the process where it was really just pushing hard to try to make sure that it was understood that if we don't get these things taken care of in the timeline that's been laid out, this deal is going to collapse. And then basically once the deal collapses, there's nothing that suggests that my buyers can't necessarily move on and go find another property, which would basically leave that seller in a situation where they no longer have a buyer.
Got it. And that actually segues me into my next point, which is administration. Like a real estate transaction has a pile of paper that needs to be in the right place at the right time. And that's not easy. So what are some of the things administratively that need to happen, just paperwork wise? Who needs to get the paperwork? Who are the key players involved in order to make sure that this deal is going to actually happen on time and properly?
Yeah, so in regards to paperwork, and obviously it depends on whether or not it's a single family home, an acreage, or a condo. There's various different documents that need to take place. In this case, it was an acreage. And so tremendous amount of conditions that need to be satisfied, because there's septic tank conditions, there's water conditions, there's subdivision plan conditions,
right?
Our property schedule in regards to just where power is coming from and all of those types of things. And so it can be quite extensive in regards to making sure that all that stuff gets handled. If certain things are missed or certain things need to be changed in regards to changing condition dates, extending them, or anything like that. All of that needs to have somebody watching over it. And so obviously the point person is the real estate agent, but other real estate companies, Mogul being one of them, will have a strong admin team who's there as a backup to ultimately make sure that the paperwork is clear and concise. And then a third backstop is the conveyancing company itself, which is ultimately with the brokerage that we deal with, the EXP. So thankfully, there's a lot of check stops in regards to making sure that everything gets taken care of and everything is on track, so that when it's handed over to the legal office, everything's in order.
Got it. Well, and Devin, it's like you're reading my mind here, because you're talking about handing off to the legal office. So let's, we're talking about deal preparation. We're talking about administration of the deal. Let's talk about the finish line, the legal aspect of it. I mean, that ultimately those contracts get to the lawyer. The lawyer's job isn't necessarily to negotiate a deal. The lawyer's job is to take the blueprint, which is like the deal, the signed contract that they've been given, and make sure that they execute the contract, which is basically just whatever the contract says, that's what you do. So that's why we started with deal negotiation, because if you don't know how to write the contract properly to protect yourself as a buyer or seller, well, I don't care how good your lawyer is, you basically already set yourself up for failure by writing a crappy contract. So, at the legal end, what are some of the things that someone would have to take care of to do a deal on their own or to be aware of?
Yeah, so one of the things that it instantly comes up all the time, and it's the first thing that pops into my head, is a if it's a condo schedule, or for a single family property, it's a real property report, which is basically just it's a blueprint or a drawing of the property itself, and making sure that everything that's actually happening at the property is clearly identified on the real property report. And so I mean, I've seen our our power team legal member Barry McGuire from Field Law talk for hours about real property reports, and that, if there's one thing I can stress, and I think Barry will be very proud of us by pointing this out, is that there's a tremendous amount of people out there that think that that title insurance takes the place of a real property report, and that is not the case. Title insurance is a different vehicle that can certainly provide some sort of protections for the buyer, but ultimately it really is about making sure you've got a current and compliant real property report, because
100%.
it's expensive. Especially the example I give to buyers is, if you see a relatively old deck, and it's a deck that's above 2 feet high, that requires a permit. And in a lot of cases, especially with houses built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, a lot of do-it-yourselfers didn't really worry about getting deck permits, and that can become expensive if the city finds that out and finds the need to maybe have that deck removed at the new owner's expense. And then on top of that, you got to go and apply for a permit and then go get a new deck built.
100%. I mean, you're saying it with a really calm voice, Devin, but like, let's get real here. Like, how much is a deck? Think about lumber, like these are some pretty huge, like, oh my God, moments that can cost you a ridiculous amount of money. And here's the thing about real estate is, once it's a signed deal, once the deposit's in, once the contract is like in that lawyer's hands, like you're on the track, you're committed, like that deal's happening. And so, like, I want to use words that will grab people's attention. Like, you could get sued, or, you could pay damages. Damages is just a fancy legal term for like so let me put it another way. Every problem that exists can be solved with a lot of money in real estate.
Yes, that's right.
To put it bluntly. So, we're talking about things where it's like, well, what's the worst that can happen? Well, the worst that can happen is 5,000, 10,000, 25,000. Like, at the end of the day, you're going to pay the cost of remedying a big problem. Like, that is just part of what can happen. So it's important to be really aware of these things. So, Devin, are there any kind of final thoughts? I mean, obviously we put the title, like, how to do a deal without a realtor. Is it possible? Yeah. Do people do deals without realtors? Yeah. But like, maybe cap it off by describing the kind of person and like what you should mentally be prepared for if you're actually serious about doing a deal without a realtor.
Yeah, so I think that, I mean, what I like to remind people is that anybody can sell or buy a house, just like anybody can go and sell or buy a car. You don't need a car salesperson to help you buy or sell that vehicle. You don't need a real estate person. We provide a service, and the reason why we have professional and expert attached to us is because we do these all the time. We have very checklists that come in regards to going through our system to make sure that everything is taken care of, to make sure that whether it's a seller or a buyer, you're well protected. You've got the opportunity to, if you're listing, to get the quickest sale possible for the most amount of money, and to make sure that you're protected. When, again, we are part of these things on a daily basis, but for somebody that's looking to buy or sell, this is a one-off situation. It might not happen again for another 5 years. And so it's a tremendous amount of items to think about, and things, real property reports, title insurance, those are things that in my dealings, a lot of people haven't even heard of that. They don't even know what those things are. And so when we're bringing those things to the table and making sure, when we talk about being protected, those are the items that we come through, because we're working our system, we're working our checklist to make sure that people are well protected, fully understand the process, and can make this very seamless. It's a very stressful thing, just simply thinking about what is it going to be like to be a homeowner?
Totally.
And all the things that come with that. We're here to basically take a lot of that stress and provide a lot of protection to the table. And that's the service that we provide.
I love it. Well, that's a great description of what the situation is, Devin. So, thanks for popping in. Thanks for, I feel like after listening to this, you kind of, if you're thinking about doing a deal on your own in real estate, have at her. But sometimes you just don't know what you don't know, and oftentimes by the time you figured out what the pitfall is, you've already fallen into it, and now you're solving that problem with money out of your pocket that could have been avoided. So, if there's one thing I know, it's that if a good realtor does their job, it doesn't actually seem like they did anything. It's like
that's well said.
It's like when you watch Connor McDavid skate down the ice there for us Edmontonians. Like, he's going at top speed, but it looks effortless. It looks like he's not even moving. It doesn't look like he's doing anything, and then all of a sudden the puck's in the net, and it's like it didn't even look like he tried. All the other players on the ice looked like they were standing still. That's what it should feel like when a good realtor does their thing. It just happens, and all of a sudden the puck's in the net, and it didn't look like there was anything to it at all. But the amount of skill that goes into making that happen is, it's substantial. So, anyways, Devin, appreciate you popping in for another Tip Tuesday. It's always a pleasure having a pro like you chime in, and we'll catch you on the next one.